nothing but Star Wars. Give me the Star Wars. Don't let them end.
Bienvenidos, worldwide fans of our planet's hottest entertainment with an edge from a galaxy far, far away. Jaime En Fuego here, once again, for my namesake program, Enfuegotainment, and I am rounding out my coverage of revisiting the altered versions of the original Star Wars trilogy, and we have finally come to Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, my favorite Star Wars film of all time. Now, I know I'm in the minority about this, and, it is the funny little argument that I'll too often point out to, Randall and Dante in Kevin Smith's Clerks movie, where they're like, I'd like them, Jedi or Empire, and just the whole argument of the two, and, their amusing discussion about collateral death, with the destruction of, the second Death Star, and the fact that it was still being worked on and all this different stuff, but, semantics and strange philosophical debates of that regard aside, I love Jedi specifically because, first and foremost, it's a very fulfilling end to a trilogy, and I know it's not as dark as Empire, obviously, and I know that there is some retread of themes like another Death Star being built and, so on and so forth, but I adore all the stuff with Emperor Palpatine. The beginning of the movie is my favorite sequence in any Star Wars film ever. I love the Jabba's Palace stuff. It was what captivated me the most as a kid, not just because of Slave Leia, but yeah, I still remember looking at the cover for the Betamax because, even before my family got a VHS, when that became the sole videotape format in the 80s, yes, my dad, he decided to go with Betamax. Better picture quality. It's what they ended up going with in Europe and I think a good portion of Asia. But over on this side of the globe, North America specifically, I don't know too well which format South America went with. But for, Canada, Mexico, the United States, yeah, we went with VHS. But I remember very distinctively that cover of the Betamax, Return of the Jedi, and just with that almost painting looking montage of all of the different characters, and they're lined up and going backwards and stuff, and just seeing Slave Leia on that, oh boy. But nonetheless, that's still, I have that poster hanging in my home for a reason. I adore it. So all the stuff in Jabba's Palace and, the Rancor and the Sarlacc pit and all this other stuff, it's still my favorite, beat of storytelling in any Star Wars film ever. And yes, the film does admittedly drag a little bit, and especially in the middle, it's just kind of okay, we're going back to Dagobah, okay, that's more retread, right? But, and then we get to Endor, and it had been a little while since I'd watched Jedi. I think it'd been maybe a couple of years since I'd sat down and watched it, and I had forgotten just the extent of time and some of the tediousness of what transpires on Endor, but I love the stuff with the Ewoks. I know it's just furries and it's silliness and everything, and I still plan on reviewing the Ewok films, both Caravan and Battle, at some particular point here before the year's over. But, just that end battle and the redemption of Vader and, the Palpatine, Sith lightning and all this different stuff. The three different battles all going on at once, Lando's redemption. There are so many cool things, and it is so satisfying of a conclusion to me. And now we have to get into the changes, because as far as changes go, I admitted during the A New Hope video in this little trio of bits that I put together that while there was definitely a significant chunk of changes visually and little tinkering things here and there, adding more dewbacks and and so on and so forth, but all of those changes I didn't really find they particularly messed with the narrative as much, and some contend that they do. And then Empire, as I mentioned in my previous video in this series, is the least tinkered with at all. It's just the glossing up of some effects, and there's the zoom in on land, Cloud City, which is very prequel-esque and stuff, but really that is the least altered of the three. And I contend this is the most altered, and you can imagine that, especially if it's the most altered and it's my most favorite, I'm going to have some significant issues with the special editions of this. And so I jump over to show you guys. just how stoked I am that I have this particular release. If I'm going to get in so it will actually focus and you can see. So this particular version has both the just jazzed up later incarnations with the new effects and so on and so forth, but it has a bonus disc in this widescreen limited edition release on DVD of the original theatrical cut. So none of those changes, none of the additional effects. And for me, what I will contend, the biggest crime in the entirety of the special editions and the further alterations that even came later in like 2004 and whatnot, the change of music. There are 2 specific musical numbers in this film. There's one in Jabba's palace that has changed completely and has some additional scenes and these 3 new singer girls that look just stupid in it. And then our Yub Yub being gone. And we get this very cheese scory kind ofness when they're showing all the different planets, and like we have to, you know, after like the prequels came out, they even added footage of, you know, just Coruscant and whatnot. But, you know, for me more so than anything, that new song in Jabba's palace is absolutely mind-numbingly aggravating. It was cool, and it was very Mos Eisley Cantina initially. And then it turns into this hammy stupidity, and you see my dude Boba, like, you know, flirting with the singer girls after the musical number and stuff, and it just it feels cheesy, and it falls so flat. And the CGI of this other singer in it, I mean, it's so unbelievably aggravating, and for me probably even more frustrating than, you know, just losing our kind of silly song, you know, you sang, I sang that so much as a kid, man. It just felt so much more warm and Star Warsy, as opposed to just how prequely that new just musical number that overtook a very satisfying conclusion. Also, we obviously know about the changes with Force Ghosts and seeing Hayden Christensen at the end as opposed to our old man, and so that was aggravating. And another big one that I have to mention is when I saw the special editions in theaters as a kid, I thought the improvements to the Sarlacc looked kind of cool. He's got like this big like beak mouth kind of thing, but I must admit, upon this rewatch, it didn't work as much for me, and I think maybe over the years I just grew to accept it and whatnot. But, you know, after having not seen it in a couple of years at this point, because since I've just got more entrenched in all of this film punditry and getting back into, you know, movie and television journalism and stuff like that, I have less time to go back and revisit the films that I want to, because of the fact that on Enfuegotainment here, since I've relaunched it, and then even more so over the last few years on the horror show, there is so much TV and new films that we need to watch for review purposes that, I don't know, the revisiting of my classics and my favorites doesn't really get the chance to happen very often. And so it had been a couple of years since I'd watched Jedi, and despite the fact that I looked at this new, just, you know, appearance and just the jazzed up effects and stuff when I was a kid, you know, in theaters watching Jedi in 1997, I believe it was. And I thought it looked cool, you know, very similar to, I liked just some of the spruced up effects on the blowing up of the Death Star and all of these other things. But in hindsight now, I think that there was like a grim, gruesome, just more creepiness to not seeing what's actually down in there, you know? I mean, the fact that I don't know, I purposefully rewatched both versions, you know, so I watched that bonus disc original theatrical on here after watching the newest version that's on Disney+. And I mean, we still get like the physical tentacle that grabs Lando's leg and everything and tries to pull him in, and I don't know, nothing will make me dislike the torturing of the droids, the Rancor eating little pig guard. I mean, all the stuff with the thermal detonator and with defrosting Han. I mean, just all of the beats in that palace, and especially when they go on the sail barge, you know, to the Sarlacc pit. And just the description of the digestion over 1,000 years, and just the pain and the suffering and all of just the weird creatures in Jabba's palace that gave me that same feeling of the Mos Eisley Cantina. Many of them practical still, despite, you know, the changing of the singer and, you know, some of the other stuff that I mentioned. So, I don't know. bottom line, I don't really like the new look of the Sarlacc in just these later versions of the film. I feel like there was an eerie mystery more so to just seeing a tentacle and just seeing like the belching kind of thing from the pit in that close-up shot that we still have. And so, I don't know. This is one where I will not be returning to watch the schnazzed up newer versions, because this is the only one where it actually pisses me off. And I'm not a rage YouTuber, somebody who rants and goes off on these crazy tangents a lot of the time. It has to be something that really, really frustrates the hell out of me to get me riled up. And you know, it's the holidays, and you know, I had a cold, and that's still kind of lingering over the days, and I feel like the timbre of my voice is still not quite right. So, you know, maybe the subduement from cold meds and, you know, different things like that don't have me in like the nerd rage mode that I probably would be more inclined to go on to, because I hate the special edition and even further improvements. Like, I'm fine with, you know, Han not shooting first. That type of stuff doesn't piss me off as much. And, you know, some of the additional stuff once they get to the Mos Eisley spaceport, and, you know, that some people think it just becomes too silly, too prequels-y. I don't know, I've grown more accepting of the prequels over the years, but, you know, like a friend of the show business, the name is eluding me, I want to say Glenn, but, you know, I'm really into the EU and the expanded coverage, and I've been getting much more into it, especially in this last year of 19 leading up to Episode 9 and The Rise of Skywalker. I've been reading a lot more of the Marvel supplemental comic books, you know, some of the novels that have come out, like Master and Apprentice, and, you know, the Queen's Handmaiden, or whatever, the Amidala, that takes place between Episodes 1 and 2, which is quite compelling and interesting as well, despite not being super action-heavy. The Dooku book, I don't know. I mean, I've grown an appreciation for the prequels by exploring the era more. So I guess maybe some of that stuff in A New Hope I'm not as upset about, just like the zoom-in scene with Leia in Empire when they're in Cloud City. I don't get as upset about that. But the changes were far too drastic from a musical standpoint for me to be forgiving and ever want to revisit these versions, this version in particular. Yeah, I will just continue to go back, break out this out-of-print DVD that has the original untampered Jedi, which I rented from Superstar Video so many times. And while it was a very nostalgic experience, you know, in '97 when I got to finally see these films on the big screen, and I think that was why the new experience of seeing these new effects and everything, it was just, it felt fresh to me, at least at the time. But special effects technology has advanced significantly in the last 20 plus years, and even still now, I don't prefer it as much. I am stoked that we have the practicality being emphasized so heavily on The Mandalorian, and can't wait for that final episode. 7 was terrific, the one that we got right before Christmas, and I know we're getting the final one right after Christmas. They're sandwiched, like the last 2 episodes of the season being sandwiched around the release of The Rise of Skywalker, which I had major issues with. So, yeah, just like I have major issues with all of the alterations, specifically in Jedi. I can forgive the stuff in the other 2, and I will probably revisit those schnazzed up versions of Empire and A New Hope at some particular point once again. But I don't know. I proclaim right now, you know, that I will never revisit the schnazzed up versions of my favorite Star Wars film of all time, Return of the Jedi. I have spoken. So, I have been Jaime En Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, besides all of the Star Wars coverage that I mentioned that I've been doing all year. I've been reviewing some of my favorite films of the year. Everything from, you know, Avengers Endgame, which is kind of a given for anybody who's into the nerd culture stuff, but also terrific epics like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Knives Out was fantastic. Good Boys, one of the funniest films that I watched this entire year. The Art of Self-Defense, Wild Rose, even stuff like John Wick 3 and Alita Battle Angel. I mean, these were terrific movies, and I enjoyed the hell out of them. So, yeah, reviews for all of those and so much more is all up on the channel from this past year when I decided to relaunch Enfuegotainment. But most of you are probably here because you know me from The Horror Show. That's right, youtube.com/The Horror Show channel, where we do at least one episode a day. In certain crazy circumstances, we double down for two if there's like an early screening we're going to, something like that. Our best of the year coverage is going to be coming very soon. Best of the year, worst of the year, and most anticipated. That's going to be coming next week during, just very last couple days of this year and this decade, which is just wild to think about. I'm also going to be doing similar videos here on Enfuegotainment for non-horror coverage, stuff like dramas, art house, stuff, sci-fi, action, things of that nature. And I just finished compiling my list for the most part, although there's still a few that I have to try to sneak in a viewing of just to see what the dilla is. But yes, if you like the spooktacular, The Horror Show is your destination. And then lastly, every single Monday evening, provided there aren't scheduling conflicts or illnesses or whatever, we have the occasional hiccup, but every Monday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, myself, Lindsay Mimsy, as I so affectionately call him from My 2 Cents of Nonsense on YouTube, we join on the Willis Screedia YouTube channel with the showrunner, the badass, the mastermind over there, CP for show business, and we talk weekend box office numbers from the weekend that has just passed. We look ahead and make some predictions for the forthcoming, and then we also have a little bit of discussion about some of the biggest entertainment stories of the past week. So yes, until the reel of Ka comes around once more, I shall say hasta luego, cinemigos and constant readers and viewers alike, whatever you're into Star Wars wise, and I'm hopeful that we get to share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until that awesome instance occurs, remember, may the Force be with you. This is the way.